Good morning, everybody. And I need to try and get my guest back in. My name's Angus Stewart. I'm the CEO of Property Master, and we seem to have just lost our guest, Ben Beadle, who is joining us. Let me make sure I invite him back in. And apologies for that.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ben. Sorry we lost you for a second there. I don't know quite what happened with the technology, but we are back, and hopefully Chris will be with us shortly too. So, morning, Chris.
Hello. Hi.
There, but we're all back here, and
We're all back. Welcome, everybody. I see we've already got some questions coming in. I will get to those. Welcome. This is our first Property Master webinar of 2021. I know that some of you may well be new to Property Master, so just to remind you, we are the online broker for buy-to-let mortgages. That is what we do. We focus on the landlord market. So welcome, everybody. I'm joined as ever by Angus Stewart, our Chief Executive. Good morning, Angus.
Good morning, everybody, and Happy New Year to you.
And also very, very delighted to introduce Ben Beadle, who is the Chief Executive of the National Residential Landlords Association, who's joining us today. So thank you, Ben. Hello.
Hello and good morning, folks.
Good morning, everybody. Right, well, we're going to kick off as we always do. Angus is going to say a few words about what he's seeing going on in the market. And I think, Angus, you've got some feedback from our Property Master clients on what they think 2021 is going to look like for them. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I've got a few slides which I will try and bring up on the screen if I can. Bear with me. Let's have a... So hopefully you can see some slides. Chris, are the slides showing to everybody?
Yep, they are, yes.
Okay, brilliant. Anyway, good morning, and as I said, Happy New Year to you. We did a survey just before lockdown, so whether people's views have changed in the last few days, I don't know. Trying to get a feel from our customers as to what they thought about the market and where things were going. So let me see if I can bring us on to... So we sent a survey to 5,500 landlords from our customer database end of last week, and we were really trying to get a feel for what are people thinking about the buy-to-let market as we come into 2021. And the great news here is the majority of people are optimistic. Understandably, we've got a lot of people sort of sitting on a fence, about sort of 25-26% of people going, well, I really don't know. And with the pandemic, the uncertainty about Brexit, the other challenges that are hitting the economy, I can totally understand why people are saying, well, I really don't know. But the good news here is, on the whole, people are more positive than negative about what's going on. We asked whether people were going to leave the market, and as you can see from this, over 80% of people are very clearly planning to stay in the buy-to-let market in 2021. And I think in some ways that sort of ties into this situation of, I'm reasonably optimistic. I don't think the bottom's going to fall out of the market. I don't really want to get out of it. And the fact that, we've only got 10% of people choosing to leave. And I'm guessing those are probably some of the smaller landlords who've been, perhaps more adversely affected by the change in tax rules, who are saying, well, I've been planning to get out. I'm just doing my tax return now. And, maybe this is the end of it for me. Are people restructuring their portfolios? Are they planning to sell any of their properties? And again, nearly 70% of people are saying they're not planning to sell any properties. And from that side, again, I think it gives a high degree of optimism in terms of how you're feeling about the market as we go through 2021. People are a bit less decided whether they're going to add to their portfolio. We're pretty much bang on. About 43% of people are saying, yeah, I plan to add. Quite interestingly, maybe they can sell to each other. 43% of people are saying, no, they're not planning to add to their portfolio. So, sort of split down the middle here. But again, I can see that, for some people, this might be a good year to purchase. I know, my view of this market, we've seen an increase in house prices in the last few weeks, driven by the stamp duty holiday. I think there's a big question in my mind whether we're going to see a slight reduction in prices post the end of March. We're still going to have an economy that's struggling. We're still going to have a lot of people who are out of work. So I think there's a real question whether or not we're going to see a normalization of prices. So rather than sort of 5-6% growth that we've seen recently, is there going to be a slight reduction in the second half of the year? And is that an opportunity for landlords to pick up properties at a sensible price? We'll see. In terms of rates, again, what do people think? Well, the majority of people think they're going to stay about the same. A few saying they're going to increase. I think nobody's sort of hoping there's going to be a decrease. So even as we're sitting here with base rate at 0.1, discussion about negative interest rates, I think there's a realism out there that we're not going to get any greater reduction in interest rates. So again, in terms of landlords, if you're going to lock into rates, probably this is a good time to lock in, because I think there's a view that we're not going to get much better from a rate perspective. And if you think about it from the lender's perspective, they're looking at perhaps portfolios that lending portfolios that won't perform as well. There's going to be a greater level of bad debt because we're in the degree of depression and recession, and as a result, they're going to be pricing in that risk into the prices that you as landlords are going to have to pay. So that's a sort of an end of a brief summary. Let's see if I can get us all back on the screen again. And I don't think it's all doom and gloom. We recognise that there are some great opportunities out there for landlords in 2021. I think we're going to see a greater rationalisation of the market, where again people people with one or two properties might exit, but greater professionalism, and portfolio landlords are going to be growing their portfolios. So crystal ball gazing is always difficult. I think if we sat here a year ago, nobody would have imagined a pandemic, a closed mortgage market, and all the other things we've seen in the last 12 months. The good news is, even though we're in lockdown today, the market is continuing to operate, so we don't have the challenges we had in sort of April, May. Surveyors can go out and survey properties, estate agents can be open, so we have a mortgage market that is continuing to operate. And so I'm hoping that some of the lenders who had some real challenges in the first lockdown don't have some of those challenges today. So.
Well, that's good news, Angus. As I was going to ask you, because obviously we did that survey before the new lockdown, although much of the country was already pretty much in that lockdown situation. So you're not seeing the kind of logjam, or you're not expecting to see the logjam we saw earlier on in the year.
I'm hoping not. I think individual lenders will have their own challenges. I don't think we've seen it return to normal yet from an operational processing capability. I still see delays in property transactions. Solicitors are still struggling to cope with the conveyancing side. Some lenders are still struggling to cope with the processing because they've got people working from home. There's been a complete change in modus operandi for some of these organisations, and just as we are at the moment, we're all operating from home. Some of us with technology find it a bit easier than others, but there are many organisations there who've had to fundamentally change the way they operate to facilitate working in these strange times that we find ourselves in, and that has had a knock-on impact on some of their processing capabilities and speed. And so the one thing I would say is that things are taking slightly longer in certain cases than they would have done a year ago, and you need to be patient. And if you're trying to purchase a property now to get through before the stamp duty cut off at the end of March, good luck, because I don't think anybody will guarantee that something will actually get through within that period of time. There could be other things that come in and crop in to prevent that happening. So.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for that, Angus. I mean, one issue, Ben, and as we've got you here, and I can see the very first question from one of our clients from Kaushik is about evictions and rents in terms of tenants not being able to pay their rent. Now, I know you've been campaigning for your members and for the sector in general on this. So what is happening? I see Sadiq Khan and others are calling for the eviction ban, which I think is supposed to, I believe, yes, expire on Monday. They're asking for that to be extended. Are you hearing anything happening on that front?
Yeah, obviously, what we've seen with coronavirus is a huge amount of uncertainty, not just in terms of the housing market, but everywhere. Now, as we're sort of moving on and we have a vaccine, we can hopefully look forward with a little bit more confidence. But you're right, the eviction provisions that were in place expire on Monday. We are expecting an announcement today. I can't see that the announcement won't be to extend it. The figures in terms of what we're seeing with coronavirus are far worse than with the original lockdown, albeit we have the saving grace of a vaccine. So the government has to act in the public health interest, and it is clearly not right for people to be booted out on the street. Now, you may find that weird coming from the boss of a landlord association. But our view on this is that, landlords and tenants both have to act responsibly. There is still the requirement to pay your rent. There is still the requirement for you, as a landlord, to do repairs and so forth. And so the background in which we operate is a really, really tricky one. So our expectation is that the eviction ban is ended. But those of you who are familiar with the eviction provisions will know that there are some marked differences, or there will be some marked differences to what we saw this time last year or in March. So we expect the courts to continue to accept cases and progress sort of the sausage factory side of the paperwork, if you will. We expect them to hear cases, and we expect that a large amount of those will be done virtually in this forum, which is probably right. But we are still expecting some exemptions to bailiff enforcement, and that's been the critical thing that didn't happen during the first lockdown. So the winter truce does provide for antisocial behaviour, for very serious rent arrears, and our intel is telling us that those exemptions will continue and will be slightly more favourable to landlords than they are at the moment. So sit tight and await the announcement. But I do think it will offer, I wouldn't say good news, because it's it's all relative, isn't it? But in terms of getting across that actually, landlords aren't somehow immune from this crisis. Landlords are suffering just as much as tenants, and particularly those who had a court order and haven't been able to enforce it since March 2020. This announcement this afternoon may well come as good news. So we will wait and see. But it remains for me to say, really, that no landlord wants to go out of their way to evict a tenant, not least during a pandemic. So it's really important that we only evict our tenants as an absolute last resort. And we've got some guidance on the NRLA website, something that's termed the golden rules, if you will, of things that landlords can do to follow to stay the right side of the law and give the tenant every opportunity where they want the opportunity to try and sustain that tenancy, because at the end of the day, it is in everybody's.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
connection difficulties there.
Yeah, I'm back, I think. Thanks for that, Ben. So something we need to watch out for later on today, and maybe more positive than we would have thought. So thank you for that. What about Kaushik's specific question, which is around students? And there's been quite a lot of media coverage around the student situation. How to deal with students who are asking for reduced rent or the early termination of their contract? Is there any advice the NRLA could give, Kaushik?
Yeah, absolutely. I think without wishing to sound horrible and terribly harsh about the situation, the student market is just the same as any other market. To be blunt, it has some very specific cyclical elements to them. But if a tenant can't afford to pay, or a tenant wishes to break their tenancy early, well, whether you're a student, whether you're working, whether you're claiming benefits, whatever your situation is, the same kind of rules apply. So you have a legally binding contract, and that's valid until it ends, and the obligations of that contract continue to apply. Obviously, the student market is such that it becomes more pronounced, and typically people in the student market will rent from the summer to the summer. In my experience, students always go home at Christmas, and I'm sure that that's what they've done this year. The marked difference between this lockdown and the past lockdown is that some universities are still open. Some universities are running courses. And so it isn't quite a blanket closure in the same way that we saw in March. So it's a very long-winded answer to a straightforward, well, it's actually not a straightforward question. So landlords, if they can afford to write down some of the rent or to bring the tenancy to an end early, that's a matter for them. And I would encourage landlords, obviously, to be as pragmatic as they can be. I say that in the spirit of full declaration that I am a student landlord, and this week I have been asked by my tenant, or by one of my tenants, to reduce the rent. And what I have said is consistent with NRLA guidance. If people have lost their job, or they've lost their source of income, talk to me about how we can signpost to other avenues where you might be able to recoup some of that income. If you can't, then a rent deferral plan is the next best thing. Now, in some instances, I have reduced the rent and not asked for it to be paid, but that depends on individual circumstances, and also my circumstances in being able to fulfill my obligations as well. So in summary, the student market isn't massively different to anybody else, but the pressures of the cyclical element to it become a little bit more pronounced. It's very much down to the landlord and tenant to negotiate this, but be aware, if you do let tenants out of the contract and you bring it to an end, what's your likelihood of being able to re-let it? What's your likelihood of being able to pay your mortgage going forwards? I'm not saying that should be the principal consideration, but it is something that you have to weigh up. The other thing that student landlords have been absolutely shafted by is having let tenants leave their tenancy early, they then have to pay council tax on that vacant property. And you and I both know students don't pay council tax, but when you've got an empty property, in some cases, you have a 200% surcharge on vacant properties. So my advice to you is to have a look at the student guidance on the NRLA website. We've got some tips that you can go through, but make it very much an individual discussion with your tenants rather than a blanket rule. You're not under any obligation currently to bring that tenancy to an end. But the Prime Minister did say at the dispatch box on Wednesday that this was an area that they were looking at. And I can't see how they can either positively discriminate against students unless they're in a student accommodation setting, which is subject to a different type of tenancy, or have that applied across the board. And I don't think that they are going to want to pay out a significant amount of money to fulfill a contract that a student should wish to provide. So it's a really, really difficult balance, because actually what it means for the student is that probably they're taking out a loan to pay their rent for a property that they are not using. That's the crux of the issue. The counter argument is the landlord, that's not the landlord's fault and it's not the landlord's problem, but what can the landlord do in the spirit of getting us through all this crap to try and help out a fellow citizen? So I don't have all of the answers on this, but I hopefully I've summarized a few options that you can take away.
Lots to think about there. Thanks, Ben. That's really helpful. And you mentioned there obviously the continued pressure on landlords who have, as you say, their own obligations. So where are we on mortgage payment holidays? Are they still available?
They are still available, and my understanding is they're still available until I think the end of March. But at the risk of wanting to pour cold water on a good idea, the mortgage holiday sounds great, doesn't it? Anything with the word holiday in it sounds like I want to be part of it, frankly. But let's call it out for what it is. This is giving landlords the ability to chuck debt to the end of the loan that will cost them more and still need to be repaid. I think it's actually really important we use the term mortgage deferral scheme, because what happened in March 2020 when this was announced, well, every bugger of my rental properties thought that a rent payment holiday would be applicable in the same way as a mortgage holiday, and obviously that takes a degree of explanation to say there's no such thing as a free lunch, and it applies to mortgages, it applies to rent, and actually it applies to all of the spending that's going on at the moment. It is going to have to be paid for somehow.
There's another wrinkle there, that if you as a landlord have taken a mortgage payment holiday, if you come for a remortgage, the lender, although it doesn't affect your credit score, a lender is likely to use that against you and say that you're under financial pressure because you had to make use of that mortgage holiday, and therefore you are less likely to get a sanction for a remortgage. So if you need to take a mortgage deferral, I think that's a better way of describing it rather than a holiday. If you need to defer because you're not receiving rent from your tenant, think very carefully whether or not you've got any other sources of income that you could use to pay the mortgage. And it really should be a last resort, because it will affect you downstream when you come to do something else. And even if that's with another lender and you've got a portfolio, they will ask the question whether or not you've actually made use of a payment holiday. So
you're absolutely right, and we are seeing calls to our helpline with landlords telling us about this issue, because this is some of the detail that doesn't get announced at a political level. It's just the headline, well, we're helping people to stay in their homes. Yes, you are, but as you say, Angus, for me this has to be a matter of last resort, particularly if you're in this for the long haul, actually.
And we have seen that, Angus, haven't we, with some clients?
We've seen it many times. Yeah, take the payment deferral if otherwise you would default.
Yep.
However, if you've got any other way of making that payment, even if you're not receiving rent from your tenant, please try and find a way of doing that, because although I'm not certain that the government, when they introduced this payment deferral mechanism, thought it would be the case, because it was clearly announced that it would not affect your credit rating, it does affect lenders' underwriting criteria, and most lenders will use it against you if you've needed to take any support.
Yeah, I mean, Angus, what are lenders up to generally in terms of their lending criteria? Are they tightening up in the light of the situation we're in at the moment?
Well, certainly they tightened up a lot after the first lockdown, and there's been a degree of loosening of certain criteria over the last 6-9 months. I've not seen the rush of withdrawal and changes of criteria in the last week that we had in the first lockdown, which is great news. I think people are seeing it just as a continuation of the current situation rather than a fundamental change as we've gone into this last lockdown this week. But lenders are going to be cautious and will continue to be cautious. And therefore, it's important that you as a landlord position yourself as effectively as possible when you need to raise finance, and don't do anything that's going to make it more challenging to get that mortgage or remortgage.
There's a specific question here, Angus, from Andy. I don't know if you can see it in the chat box. He's saying, any news on MTD costings or requirements for individual landlords and companies with buy-to-let?
MTD. I don't know what he means by MTD.
No. I don't know, Andy, if you can give us a bit more information there. That would be helpful.
Do you understand what he means by MTD?
I don't. I'm wondering if it's anything in relation to mortgage interest relief from a tax perspective, but I'm not entirely sure what MTD I feel as though I should know what MTD stands for.
Making tax digital.
Oh God, yes.
Ah, thank you, Andy. Thank you.
So I should know what that is about. Thank you for the explanation. This is the next train crash that's just about to leave Paddington, destined for Bristol, and at the moment it's stuck at Reading. This is going to be a bit of a pain, actually. We are involved in a working group at the moment, but essentially, if you're over a certain income, and that has to be determined, you will be moving to reporting to Treasury in your tax return on a quarterly basis, basically, and it's all part of the the turning of the screw to get more money into the coffers, as far as I can see. I'm pretty sure that they are aiming for 2023 from memory. But it will almost certainly have implications for landlords over and above the existing taxation arrangements, and Andy differentiates between landlords and companies, and obviously there's a big difference there in terms of how you acquire a property, whether as an individual or whether you incorporate, and the knock-on tax implications with regards to mortgage interest. So all of these things are going to be generally conspiring against us. But I have to say, a wise man once said, "There's only two things that are certain in life. One is death, and one is taxes." And I think the train crash is a couple of years away, and it's going to be a little bit painful.
Well, actually, now you're on to tax there, Ben. It was something I was going to throw at you. We've got I think March the 3rd is the budget. There's been a lot of press speculation around capital gains tax, amongst others. And you said yourself, someone has to pay for all of this. Are landlords going to find themselves with a bigger bill post-March, do you think, or will they wait?
Well, I think that date, if I'm correct, was announced before the current lockdown, and I think that budget was billed as being sort of a recovery budget, which may be slightly optimistic. I think that we are still in the realms of, we're in a sinking ship and we are bailing out water with buckets with holes on at the moment, and so I think it's inconceivable that landlords and plenty of other people will be touched by the measures that need to be brought in. What I'm unsure of at the moment is to whether it will be in this budget, because, as I say, it doesn't feel to me that we should be moving to recovery when we've done 1.5 million vaccines. We need to roll that out and throw the kitchen sink at all of that and spend some money. I think the spending is still going to continue, so that may be a slightly more optimistic take on it. But the pain, whether it comes this year or whether it comes later in the year, it will be there on the horizon. And unfortunately, if you're a homeowner or you've got more than one property, you are a sitting duck, and it is very, very difficult to argue against, I think. And I go back to Angus's slide about confidence, that the argument in these instances is always that landlords leave the market. Well, do you know what? They don't always, and even in the most severest of storm, landlords are a resilient bunch, and the people that tend to leave the market are, as you rightly say, Angus, those smaller landlords, or those landlords that have been in the game for a very long period of time, that are sick to the back teeth of all of the things that are coming down the track. What we see is a kind of new landlord that, despite the storm that's going on, have got balls of steel and are investing and coming into the market regardless. So I'm sure we will argue that landlords will leave the market if they touch capital gains and other types of things, but the reality is that in any significant numbers they don't.
Interesting. And also there's been a bit of a boost, well, more than a bit of a boost, a big boost as a result of the stamp duty cut as well, which I think many of us were surprised to see applied to landlords, albeit, we still got that uplift. Ben, have you heard anything? There's again been a bit of lobbying around getting stamp duty, getting that cut extended, or perhaps flexing the rules slightly because of the delays that Angus mentioned. Do you think that's going to happen?
I'm not massively confident on that front. I think with any stimulus that is brought in, and housing is often used for that. We're obsessed with housing in this country. If it's extended by a couple of months, we'll be having the same conversation. A few weeks before, it will have an impact. It has had an impact. It probably has had the desired impact, I would venture, in terms of coupling that with the housing market being open, viewings able to take place, all removals, surveyors, all of that sort of jazz. The housing market is incredibly important to the economy of this country, but Wales don't apply the discount to landlords, so the discount is only for English landlords, and all good things have to come to an end. And we've seen this morning that the house prices in December are at a record high. I don't know that the government necessarily wants to artificially inflate house prices for the medium to longer term. So yes, it would be kind of great if the stamp duty moratorium kind of was extended a little bit, but I don't. My gut is telling me I don't think it will. And it's it's the same with any type of artificial stimulus. It has to come to an end sometime, and when it comes to an end, it is a little bit painful for a while as things adjust. And actually, dare I say it, but possibly all you're doing is encouraging those that might otherwise have moved to move earlier. So you have a big bang approach to house sales, and then over the same period, probably the same amount of people roughly would have moved anyway, but you're just taking a hit up front. It's like advanced rent. Don't spunk it all in the first month. You need to save it for a little bit down the track, and I probably applied the same with stamp duty. So I don't want to sound negative on that point, but for me, landlords' confidence should be, around the fiscal environment, tenants having the ability to meet their rental obligations, landlords able to access justice if you have a won't pay tenant so you can get possession of your property back in a timely fashion. Those are the bigger issues of the day for the NRLA, rather than a stamp duty holiday.
Yeah, thank you for that. Don't forget, guys, any more questions, please just pop them in the chat box. Interesting, Angus, there, talking about house prices, because I know we've talked about it a lot, and some commentators are saying there will still be an uplift. Others are saying no, they're going to, if not crash, go down substantially. What are valuations looking like at the moment, Angus? Are you seeing anything interesting there?
Well, we still get surprised by down valuations that are happening even in a market where there seems to be a lot of froth. So although valuations on the whole are holding up, we are getting a reasonable number that are coming in at slightly lower than our landlords are expecting. And I think there is still a degree of concern amongst valuers and lenders that what we're seeing at the moment is a degree of froth, and people are maybe paying over the odds slightly for their dream property while they can get the stamp duty reduction, rather than a realistic price for that property. So I'm with Ben. I don't think it will get extended beyond the end of March. I do think we're then going to see a slight reduction in pricing after that, because the froth will be out of the market. And I think for landlords that are looking to extend their portfolios, that might be a good thing. And hopefully there'll be some opportunities in sort of the second half of the year for landlords to pick up properties at a better price. So although you won't get the benefit of the stamp duty, you only got a benefit of 15,000 if it was a £500,000 property. The average landlord property is significantly cheaper than that, and therefore you're probably only talking a few grand benefit from stamp duty. You're probably going to get a greater benefit if the prices drop a bit. So I just but crystal ball gazing is very difficult when it comes to the housing market. and what the value of properties are. So
yeah, well, most landlords tend to take a long-term view, so I think we're edging to that, aren't we? Ben, Anna has just posted a question, which was actually on my list as we've got you here today. What is the future of Section 21? Is something going to happen this year? It's been long trailed, hasn't it?
It has been long trailed. We've been lobbying hard on this point, that the removal of Section 21, we certainly don't oppose. I think any good landlord who is doing things properly will only ever evict their tenants if there is a fault, or they wish to sell, or they wish to move back in. And our proposals for the Renters Reform Bill try and advance the conversation away from the rhetoric of Section 21 going and talking about an environment of how landlords and tenants can operate in a post Section 21 apocalypse. I don't think the world is going to fall in with Section 21 going. I think people will have to adjust, but it will go. It is a commitment, a manifesto commitment, a Queen's Speech commitment, and it's one of those things that has universal support across the political spectrum. To coin a phrase, I may well be weeing in the wind if I was to be a lone voice in suggesting it remain. And so what we have tried to do, as I say, is to advance the debate around, well, what does a post Section 21 world look like? And for us, it's clear and comprehensive grounds for repossession, as well as the use of conciliation to make sure that every opportunity is afforded to keep people in their homes, not least at the moment. Because as a landlord myself, I'm not one of these people that thinks it's a good idea just to willy-nilly give somebody a Section 21. I think those people are few and far between, but they're the people that get the headlines. And that's the problem that landlords have. And from the point of view of mortgages as well, the banks have got to have the confidence that the asset can be recouped within a reasonable time frame, and so any post Section 21 removal has got to be there's got to be a system that works and still allows that. So we have to cut through the crap on this and say, well, what does it look like? And it is clear and comprehensive grounds for eviction in a no fault world. And I'm being asked about the rent cap as well. I'm reminded on this that there is something that people may recall called the Rent Assessment Committee, now the first tier tribunal. And what the argument here is that landlords would just jack up the rent in order to force somebody out. Well, I don't accept that, and I don't accept that you need a rent cap. I think the existing provisions that we have for tenants to be able to challenge their rents, both new rents and rent increases, are already there, and they will become far more prominent in the Section 21 world. And I'm not really an advocate of creating new legislation when you've got something perfectly adequate that deals with the problem. So those landlords who think that they can get around Section 21 will be disappointed.
Good advice. So begin to think about that new world then, Ben, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it's difficult at the moment, but we are, when we get through this current storm, you can see a channel. We've got increased notice periods at the moment, and we've got a court system that is broken. So you can see kind of a gradual move away from emergency measures to the Renters Reform Bill in a no-fault world. But the Minister is absolutely right, and we've been lobbying on this point. So Chris Pincher has said that we can only move, or he will only move to remove Section 21 when there is, I forget the funny term he used, but stable economic terrain. I think was the expression, which is slightly unfortunate because I don't know that we're ever going to get stable economic terrain anytime soon. But the point is well made that the current arrangements have been in place for 30 plus years. So it's not just a case of saying, bang, Section 21 is gone. They are subject to 6 months notice period, and they are deprioritised by the courts at the moment. That ought to be a halfway house actually to assuaging concerns around Section 21, but we have to move in an orderly way into what the post Section 21 world looks like. And for those that are interested, our Renters Reform Bill's proposals are on our website, and we presented those just before Christmas, which were well received. It's all too easy to talk about Section 21 going. What replaces it? How does it work? And we've set that out very, very clearly.
Yeah, there needs to be a whole context around it.
There does.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, but Ben Tusha is also asking, maybe he's doing his own tax return. Yeah. Will there be any help post the abolition of mortgage interest tax relief? I mean, it's been tapered now, hasn't it, over the last few years? This is the last year. If you're doing it now,
absolutely,
you can claim it. Is there going to be any help?
Well, Tusha, I if you're doing your tax return at the moment, I absolutely feel your pain on this front without going into too much detail. I think the simple answer on this is no. The mortgage interest rate relief was brought in for a reason. It was brought in to cool the market, and it was brought in to revenue raise. So from the point of view of policy, what it was brought in to do, it works beautifully. The fact it's monumentally unfair and the bane of most landlords' existence is neither here nor there. We have to choose our moments on this, Tusha. So I don't think this is dead in the water. But I think to argue for tax breaks at a point when people are losing their homes, unable to pay their rent and losing their jobs is the wrong time. So from the NRLA perspective, I know that firsthand that this causes significant pain to landlords. We don't think it's dead in the water, but we don't think the right time is to bring it out just now.
Okay, excellent. I don't, Angus, can you see Philip's question there about lenders' reluctance to support lending for property that will be used for providing homes for clients of registered service providers? Is that something you can shed any light on?
Yeah, well, what I would say, and I'm struggling really to read all the question, but if you go back 3 years or so ago, most lenders would have within their mortgage contracts a clause which said that you weren't allowed to lend to DSS clients, and I can remember when we first launched Property Master. Our system takes in criteria from all the lenders, asks the lenders to confirm what their criteria. We put an application into a particular lender who, as far as we were concerned, it met all their criteria, and they declined it. And we said, well, why have you declined it? Well, it's housing benefit tenant. But your criteria, which you've signed off, says that you accept DSS or housing benefit tenants. And they said, oh well, we don't like to publicise that we don't. And I thought that was just dreadful. Now, a year or more ago, NatWest got in a lot of problems in the press by, again, similarly refusing to remortgage a performing landlord's property because the tenant at that time was now on benefits, and they subsequently changed their mind. And if I look at it today, the majority of lenders will accept people who are on some form of housing benefit support. I think the last time I looked at it, 2/3 would and 1/3 wouldn't. And even that 1/3, I'm sure if you spoke to them and if you've got a performing mortgage, they probably would find it difficult to refuse, because there's been various court cases recently which make it more challenging for them not to accept tenants in that position.
And Angus, I might just jump in there and say you're right to allude to the court cases, because this is an area that I know is going to get extra coverage over the next year or so, with tenant groups really focusing on housing benefit tenants being rejected. So there's a couple of schools of thoughts here. One, we're in a massive recession, people are losing their jobs. Actually, housing benefit might be the only secure form of revenue that landlords are going to get. I say that slightly tongue in cheek, but it may be. So I wouldn't be too dismissive about it. The second point on this is that actually assessing a tenant has to be done on a bespoke basis of affordability. And if your mortgage company, insurance company, or you believe that they refuse people on housing benefit or universal credit or whatever it happens to be, ring them up and check, because a lot of landlords use this as a default reason not to accept tenants on benefit, and there have been court cases at the back end of last year where that has been disproven, only at county court level, so it's not necessarily a binding judgment, but the writing is on the wall, and stay the right side of the law. I've got a little podcast that I did with housing lawyer Tesha Shepperson a couple of months ago. If you go to the landlordlawyerpodcast.com, it's on there, and we talk about how you can quantify housing benefit tenants. But essentially, it's the same affordability calculation as anything else. You just remove any prejudice you have about tenants on housing benefit. It's as simple as that.
Good advice.
I think one of the things that's interesting as we've moved from into a universal credit environment, there's not a single lender in terms of their criteria that I'm aware of that says you can't have people on universal credit, because universal credit covers such a broad range of different benefits in terms of things like child tax credits, which are quite normal and have always been accepted as part of a revenue side, and therefore and I talk to lenders and say, well, why have you said you don't take housing benefit, but you do take universal credit into consideration? And they haven't got an answer because they've not thought it through, because the policies have been set 10, 15 years ago, and we're in a very different era in terms of risk assessment and approach. So I think my view is along with you, Ben, just assess individuals. Your lender should not have a problem if you don't have a problem. And again, I've got friends who've got a number of buy-to-lets where they've got housing benefit tenants in there, and they are their best performers because the housing benefit in those cases is going direct to the landlord rather than via the tenant. And I think that's where one of the challenges is with universal credit, is often gets paid to the tenant who doesn't pay it on to the landlord. And maybe there's something there which is making sure or seeing if you can get stuff paid to you directly rather than going via a tenant where it may not always get passed on in full.
Okay, well, we'll be drawing to a close soon, guys. We've got some questions. Well, thank you for that link, Ben. Excellent. Question from May here. What is the best move to remortgage in order to buy to let or take out a new mortgage?
Well, if you've got a property already, you are remortgaging, because now you might stay with the existing lender and do something called a product transfer, or you may move to another lender and do a remortgage. And I think a lot of this depends on your circumstances. If you are looking to borrow more money, then you are going to have to do a remortgage. If you're just maintaining the amount of money you're looking to borrow, then you just need to look quite carefully at what the deals might be available through your existing lender as opposed to moving to another lender. And sometimes you are better off moving to a new lender, but if you're doing that, then there is a full underwriting situation, and therefore if you've had arrears or you've had other challenges, that might mean that you're going to find it more difficult to get a mortgage. What I would say is go along to the Property Master website, put in your details there, and if you put in information about your existing lender, it will tell you whether you're better off staying with the current lender or moving to somebody new, and we're able to help you and guide you through that process.
And May's just posted she has a property which is mortgage free and she wants to buy another buy-to-let. Okay,
well, if that's the case, it makes sense for her to leverage by remortgaging her current property. Again, you can, in terms of our site, we can tell you where the best deals are. We've got a brand new mortgage calculator which you can play with, which will look at the affordability situation as well as the LTV boundaries, so you can work out how much you can borrow at the best possible price, and we can assist you in terms of giving you the cash to enable you to purchase a new property. And we'll work together on both the remortgage and a purchase for you.
And Tush has just posted, what happens if the current lender reduces the value of the property? You mentioned issues with valuation. And
it's a real issue at the moment. I mean, you are getting lenders who are reducing value. Again, we can help you and understand whether or not you want to stay with that existing lender or whether you move to somebody else. A lot of this comes back to the affordability rules, which vary by lender in terms of how much they're willing to borrow to lend against a particular valuation LTV band. It's not as simple as saying the value's being reduced. There are other considerations in there. So again, come and talk to us. We're happy to help you get the best possible deal for your situation.
Thank you for that. And lastly, just to finish here really on the prospects going forward, had a question here about rental yields and rents generally. What is happening with rents generally, Angus, at the moment? There has been some recent quite comforting news on that front.
Well, I think it really depends on where in the country you are. If you're in central London, rents are a little softer than they were. and I can't see that changing with people able to work from home these days. The desire to be in zone 1, zone 2 with no theatres open, no restaurants open, and no gardens is probably a little less attractive than it used to be a year or more ago. So you're seeing rent softening in central London. Outside London, in terms of some of the commuter areas into London, or the northwest or some other areas, we're seeing quite strong rentals, and and I don't think it's quite as depressing for landlords as it was. There's still increased demand. I think we've seen a lot of situations where during certainly the first lockdown, and I'm sure this one, you've got couples separating, divorcing. They need new properties. There is a demand out there for new properties. So I think and certainly I was talking to some estate agents a month or more ago in my area in the Midlands, and things were going in 24 hours. Good properties were being rented at a decent rent in 24 hours. There was huge demand there. And so I can't see softening outside London in the same way as I'm seeing in central London. Ben, do you have any comments?
I would echo that. I think it does depend where you are. I was doing an article just before Christmas about the impact that lockdown and people's habits had on central London rents, with rents being renegotiated up to 20% lower. But similarly, a real boom almost in terms of different types of accommodation houses, and rather than flats, not necessarily on commuter lines outside of the capital. And I think that what we don't know at the moment is whether that is going to be a longer term trend or whether it's a trend just for this year. But I wouldn't read too much into averages on yields, because I just think it depends so much on individual areas, and not least the political backdrop against lockdown, that are forcing people, perhaps for the short term, to act quite differently.
Yeah, excellent. Just a couple of questions to finish off here. Tusha, on this valuation question again, which is clearly concerning people, Angus, can your current lender reduce the value and not notify you? Are they supposed to inform you if the value is reduced closer to a remortgage?
Well, they won't inform you. It sounds as though they're maybe using some automated valuation tool if you're getting an indication that they think the value is lower. Normally, they wouldn't value a property until you put in for a remortgage. And so, but some of them will use AVM tools as part of the product transfer view. So again, talk to us, Tusha. I mean, we understand, we know that some of the valuers are coming in with slightly lower rates. I mean, it could be that this is a property that needs a specific valuation from a surveyor, rather than some generic one because of its local area. There are different tools people use, and sometimes you actually need to go out and see a property. But it's a difficult market out there, and sometimes lenders will deliberately or would appear to have a lower valuation on a property if they're wanting to get out of that type of property, or they're looking to restructure their portfolios. Sometimes they may be less willing to lend on certain areas because they're too heavily into a particular local area or local market. So there could be all sorts of reasons why you're feeling as though that lender doesn't want to lend to you at that particular valuation.
Yeah, thanks, Tish. I mean, do come back to us perhaps afterwards. You can always get us on info@property-master.com. Last question here from Cowper. If I wish to redevelop commercial property to residential buy-to-let, who would potentially finance this, buy-to-let or a commercial loan? There are, come and talk to us. I mean, drop us a line or get in touch, pick up the phone to us. There are lots of people out there who will fund that commercial loan. I mean, it may well be that there are ways of doing it on a bridge as you convert it into buy-to-let. There may be other organisations who are happy to lend on it and continue as a buy-to-let. What you do find is some of the commercial rates are significantly higher than the buy-to-let rates. So I do think it needs to be looked at in the round and understand how quickly can you convert that property, because you want to have a way of purchasing it at the minimum cost and then getting it onto some form of sensible price buy-to-let mortgage.
And so I do think it depends on the situation, depends on how much you're looking to borrow, and from a lender's perspective, it depends on how risky they think the situation is.
Yeah. Oh, I just one more here from Mr. Chugg. I know we know Mr. Chugg was on earlier on, wasn't he? What are lenders thinking when it comes to furlough pay? How are they viewing furlough pay, Angus?
Well, again, there's a difference in treatment in residential and the treatment in the buy-to-let. I've got many lenders in buy-to-let, as long as the property is tenanted and you've got decent rent being received, they're not worried about your pay. Some of them might want to have a minimum 25 or 30,000 proven income from you. Others, if you're in a sort of an area where the affordability rules don't work, and we need to use something called top slicing to actually demonstrate that you can afford the rent. It's predominantly for either high LTVs and sort of the southeast of the country. In that case, then furlough may be a challenge for some of the lenders. But again, I think we've got to take it on an individual basis. But if you've got a reasonably performing property or portfolio, I don't think furlough pay is going to be a huge issue in terms of getting you some mortgage.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, we've overrun in actual fact, we've had so many questions, but that's good news. So thank you all so much for tuning in, and all those of you who raised questions. You can always get hold of us at info@property-master.com, or just go to our site. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us and picking up some of those tough questions, and thank you for all the work you're doing on behalf of the sector, lobbying the government and putting the voice forward of landlords. So thank you for that, and thanks, Angus, as well. Hope to see you all again next month. Take care, everybody, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, folks.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.